The transmission came in at 0244. The SAS patrol commander was already moving when it arrived. 4 words, delivered flat. No drama, no hesitation, no diplomatic cushioning for the American command element listening on the joint frequency. We are pulling out. The American mission commander, a Delta Force major with 3 Iraq rotations behind him, a man who had operated alongside British Special Forces on 16 previous missions without incident, later described the moment as the most disorienting professional experience of his career. Not the decision itself, the reason for it. The SAS had not pulled out because the objective was too heavily defended. They had not pulled out because the intelligence had changed. They had not pulled out because of casualties, or equipment failure, or any of the tactical contingencies that a joint operations plan includes by default. They had pulled out because the American element operating on the same target had compromised the operation. His element and the SAS patrol commander, 30 meters from the compound wall with 3 of his men behind him and the whole night still ahead, had made a professional assessment in approximately 4 seconds. The assessment was, the American insertion had been seen. The assessment was, the target now knew they were coming. The assessment was, continuing into a compromised objective against a hardened AQI command node in the northern Bakwaba district, at 0244 in the morning, with an adversary now awake and expecting them, was a different operation to the one that had been planned. It was a different operation to the one the SAS had agreed to run. 4 words. We are pulling out. The American major's response, delivered on the same frequency, became the unofficial title of the incident in the joint operations debrief that followed. Your boys got us compromised. He was wrong. He would spend the next 40 minutes understanding exactly how wrong he was. The joint operation had been 18 days in planning. The target was a senior AQI logistics and finance coordinator operating out of a compound network in the northern Bakwaba district, a figure whose removal had been assessed as likely to degrade AQI operational capability across the Diyala corridor by approximately 30% over the following 6 weeks. That assessment came from the CIA analytical cell attached to JSOC. It was not an optimistic estimate. It was supported by 8 months of intelligence collection and the specific, documented evidence of the coordinator's role in financing 9 IED emplacement events that had resulted in 14 coalition fatalities. 14. The operation had been planned with unusual care precisely because the target was known to have a sophisticated counter-surveillance capability. The planning cell, drawn from both the SAS troop and the Delta Force element that had been working the Bakwaba district for 6 weeks, had specifically designed the joint approach to avoid generating the operational signatures the target had demonstrated an ability to detect. 2 insertion routes, 2 elements. The American team approaching from the southwest through the industrial zone. The SAS patrol approaching from the north through the agricultural drainage network. Sequential timing designed so that neither insertion would be visible or audible to the compound before the assault commenced. The plan was good. The execution on the American side was not. The Delta insertion had been scheduled to commence at 02:15. Actual commencement, 02:31. A 16-minute delay generated by a vehicle mechanical issue at the staging point. A delay that the American mission commander had assessed as manageable within the operational window. He had not communicated the delay to the SAS patrol commander because the delay had not, in his professional judgment, compromised the operation. He was operating from a different risk calculus than the SAS patrol commander. The SAS risk calculus was built on a specific piece of knowledge that had come from the REX phase of the planning process. The target's compound employed a rotating foot watch on the southwestern approach, a single local observer, cycling every 90 minutes, whose last rotation had ended at 02:00. At 02:15, the American insertion would have been moving through dark ground with the watch position empty. At 02:31, the watch position was occupied again. The Delta element had moved through the industrial zone 16 minutes late, at a pace, and with a noise discipline that had been calibrated for darkness and an empty watch position. The watch position was not empty. The SAS Rex operator monitoring the northern approach from his static position had seen the compound's internal lights activate at 02:38. He had seen movement on the compound's interior. At 02:44 he transmitted. The SAS patrol commander, already at the northern wall with 3 men behind him, received the transmission and made his assessment. 4 seconds. We are pulling out. The American major's accusation, "Your boys got us compromised," was understandable. It was also, as a professional assessment, completely wrong. And the 40 minutes that followed the SAS withdrawal from the northern approach demonstrated exactly why it was wrong in a way that no debrief language could have communicated as effectively. The Delta element, committed to the southwestern approach and unaware at that moment of the precise nature of the compromise, continued toward the objective. The SAS did not. What the SAS patrol commander had understood in 4 seconds, and what the American major had not fully processed in the same 4 seconds, was the specific doctrinal difference between operating against a target that does not know you are coming and operating against a target that does. These are not the same operation. Against an unaware target, a well-trained assault element has decisive advantages: surprise, initiative, the psychological shock of an unexpected breach. The target's 31 compound personnel, assessed as mostly non-combatant staff and financial operations personnel, would, in the uncompromised operation, have faced 8 trained assault operators arriving simultaneously through 2 entry points before any coherent defensive response could be organized. Against an aware target, those advantages evaporate. An aware compound with 31 personnel, forewarned by an observer and with a minimum of 13 minutes to prepare, the time between the watch position being triggered at 02:31 and the SAS patrol commander's transmission at 02:44, is a tactically and legally different problem. The assessment changes. The risk calculus changes. The specific mission the Joint Planning Cell had designed, a rapid, simultaneous 2-element breach exploiting surprise, no longer exists. The SAS patrol commander had made this assessment in 4 seconds because he had been trained, selected, and operationally forged to make this exact kind of assessment in exactly this kind of situation. The Delta element continued. At 02:51, 7 minutes after the SAS withdrawal, the Delta team made contact at the southwestern compound wall. The breach attempt encountered prepared resistance, armed personnel positioned behind the wall section, an opposition that would not have been present or organized or armed and positioned in the operation that had been planned. The engagement lasted 11 minutes. The target, the AQI logistics coordinator, the reason for 18 days of planning and 14 preceding coalition fatalities, was not in the compound. He had left through the vehicle gate on the northern wall, the wall the SAS patrol had been 30 meters from when they pulled out at approximately 02:42, 2 minutes before the SAS withdrawal transmission, 12 minutes after the watch position was triggered. The SAS patrol commander, withdrawing through the agricultural drainage network, had heard the vehicle. He had noted the departure time and direction. He had transmitted both. At 03:24, 40 minutes after pulling out, the SAS patrol intercepted the target's vehicle on the road east of Bakwaba, using the direction of departure and a 35-minute ground movement that the patrol commander had calculated from the moment he heard the engine. The target was detained without resistance. The American major extracted from the southwestern compound at 03:09 with 2 personnel requiring medical attention and an objective that had yielded nothing, was informed at 03:31 that the SAS had the target in custody. He did not respond immediately. When he did, the message was 3 words. How did you know? The answer to "How did you know?" is the answer to everything that distinguishes the SAS operational methodology from the systems it works alongside. The SAS patrol commander had known, in 4 seconds, that the operation was compromised because he had been told, in specific, precise, ground truth detail, by a REX operator who had been in a static observation position, overlooking the compound's northern and western approaches for 31 hours before the operation commenced. Not from satellite imagery. Not from signals intelligence. From 31 hours of watching in person, with binoculars and a notebook, from a position 12 meters from the compound's outer wall. The REX operator knew that the compound's southwestern foot watch rotated every 90 minutes because he had watched it rotate 9 times. He knew the exact timing of the 02:00 watch change, within 40 seconds, because he had observed the previous 3 changes and confirmed the pattern. He had included this information in the operational planning package transmitted on day 2 of his observation, flagged as a timing-critical constraint on the insertion window. The delta element had been briefed on this constraint. The 16-minute delay had moved their insertion outside the window. This is not a criticism of the delta force major as an individual. It is a structural observation about 2 different approaches to the management of operational timing in a joint mission context. The American approach, built on a risk calculus that weights organic capability heavily, had assessed a 16-minute delay as manageable. The reasoning was implicit. If the insertion is seen, the assault capability is sufficient to handle a prepared defense. The technical and firepower edge is sufficient to compensate for the loss of surprise. The British approach, built on a risk calculus that treats surprise as a force multiplier that cannot be compensated for by firepower, had assessed the same 16-minute delay as a mission-ending event, not because the assault capability was insufficient, because the operation that had been planned no longer existed. A different operation, entered into without revision, without new planning, without a specific decision to accept the changed parameters, is not an operation. It is an improvisation against an unknown enemy state in a hardened compound. The SAS do not improvise against unknown enemy states in hardened compounds. They plan, they REX, they wait, and when the plan no longer matches the ground truth, they do not continue on the basis that organic firepower will compensate for the deviation. They pull out, and then they do something else. The something else in the Bakwaba case was 35 minutes of ground movement through agricultural drainage terrain, in darkness, at a pace, and with a route calculated from the sound of a vehicle engine and the observation of a direction of travel, to a road interception point that the patrol commander had identified and logged during the REX phase as a probable escape route in the event of compound compromise. He had identified it. He had logged it. He had retained it as a contingency. Not because he expected the operation to be compromised. Because the SAS planning methodology requires, as a matter of standard procedure, the identification of contingency options for every foreseeable deviation from the plan, including the deviation in which the plan becomes operationally void, and the mission must be achieved by a completely different means. The target was on the vehicle interception route because the SAS REX operator had, on day 1 of his 31-hour observation, watched the compound's vehicles use that road for resupply, and noted it as the primary eastern egress. The target took that route because it was the fastest way east from a compound that had just been warned it was under surveillance. The SAS were on it because a man with binoculars and a notebook had spent 31 hours in a ditch 12 meters from a compound wall. This is the answer to how did you know? You know because you were there. You know because you stayed there long enough to see the pattern. And you know because you built your contingency from what you saw before you needed it. The Joint Operations Debrief, conducted at the Coalition Forward Operating Base outside Bakwaba at 08:00 the following morning, was described by one of the British officers present as the most professionally useful 2 hours I spent in Iraq. It was not comfortable. The American major, a professional who, by every account of those who knew him, had the specific courage to be wrong in public when the evidence required it, walked through his decision to continue after the 16-minute delay. He walked through his risk assessment. He walked through the reasoning that had led him to accept the changed parameters without revising the plan. And then he walked through the consequences. 2 of his personnel had required medical attention after the southwestern compound engagement. Neither injury was life-threatening, but both were the direct result of a prepared defensive position that would not have existed in an uncompromised operation. The target had been absent from the compound. The objective had yielded no intelligence of significance. The 14-month collection effort that had built the targeting package had produced a direct action operation that, in his own words, should have worked and didn't because of one decision I made in a staging area in the dark. The SAS patrol commander presented the same timeline from the northern approach. He walked through the Rex operator's transmission. He walked through his 4-second assessment. He walked through the withdrawal and the ground movement and the vehicle interception. He presented the detained target, whose exploitation had already begun and had yielded, in the 6 hours since detention, the initial elements of a network contact list that the CIA analytical cell was assessing as potentially more valuable than the targeting file on the coordinator himself. Then he said something that the debrief record, according to one officer who was present, captured verbatim. The operation was compromised at 02:31. I continued my mission. The mission changed. Continuing on the original plan against a compromised objective would have been a failure of professional judgment, not a demonstration of it. The room was quiet for a moment. The American major nodded. What had happened in the Bakwaba compound engagement was not, in the final analysis, a failure of the Delta element's capability. It was a demonstration of something more subtle and more difficult to address institutionally. The difference between a risk calculus built on confidence in organic firepower and a risk calculus built on the understanding that surprise is not a nice-to-have tactical advantage, but the load-bearing pillar of a specific kind of operation. When that pillar is removed, the operation does not become harder. It becomes a different operation. And a different operation, entered into without deliberate choice, is not an operation at all. The American major had spent 18 days planning the right operation. He had then, in a staging area in the dark, allowed circumstances to convert it into a different operation without explicitly deciding to accept that conversion. The SAS patrol commander had noticed the conversion in 4 seconds and refused it. This distinction, between noticing that circumstances have changed the operation and choosing to act on that notice, is the product of a specific kind of training, a specific kind of operational experience, and a specific kind of individual capability that no platform, no budget, and no technology can replicate. It is the product of a selection process that finds, on a Welsh mountain in January, the men who will make the right call in a staging area in the dark in Bakwaba at 02:44 on a joint operation that has just been compromised by their partners. The Bakwaba incident did not damage the operational relationship between the SAS element and the Delta Force team. It improved it. This is perhaps the most important thing about the incident, that the debrief record and the subsequent change to the joint operational protocols that govern timing and delay communication in that theater demonstrates. The American major was not a man who looked for someone to blame. He was a professional who had made a professional error and was prepared to examine it in professional terms. The change he pushed for, a joint protocol requiring immediate communication of any staging delay exceeding 5 minutes, and a mandatory joint assessment of the impact of that delay on timing-critical operational constraints, was implemented across the Coalition's Special Forces cooperation framework in the Diyala corridor within 3 weeks. It would prevent the same class of error on 4 subsequent joint operations. But the protocol change, useful as it was, did not address the deeper question that the Bakwaba incident raised. The question of what the SAS patrol commander, had that allowed him to make a correct 4-second operational assessment in circumstances that had caused a highly trained and experienced American officer to make an incorrect one. The answer is not in the protocol. It is not in the joint training program that the 2 units subsequently conducted on timing and compromise assessment. It is not in any institutional mechanism or procedural change that the 2 commands implemented in the months after Bakwaba. The answer is in 31 hours in a ditch 12 meters from a compound wall. It is in the Rex operator who watched 9 guard rotations and logged the timing of each one, because the timing of the 10th might matter. It is in the planning methodology that identifies contingency routes and vehicle interception points during the Rex phase, before the operation begins, because the operation might not go to plan, and the mission must still be achieved by other means. And it is in the selection process that finds the specific human quality, the operational instinct that is really accumulated experience operating at speed, the judgment that is really calibrated risk assessment performing below the threshold of conscious deliberation. That makes 4 seconds sufficient to correctly read a changed operational environment at 02:44 in the morning in the dark outside a compound in Bakwaba. The American major's 3 words, "How did you know?" were the right question. The answer took longer than 3 words. It took 31 hours in a ditch. It took 4 seconds on a north wall. It took 35 minutes through an agricultural drainage network to a road interception point that had been identified as a contingency on day 1 of the Rex. And it began, as it always begins, as it has always begun, on a Welsh mountain in January, where a selection process that has been finding the right men since 1940, one found the man who would know in 4 seconds that the operation was over and that the mission was not. Your boys got us compromised. No, your boys got you compromised. Mine noticed.